Okay, everybody, welcome to the March 2021 Continuous Delivery Foundation meetup. I am Tracy Reagan, the organizers of this meetup, and I'm pretty excited today to have Fatih Diggerminsi speaking today on a topic that is sort of new. Fatih's got some very interesting background here. He has been working for Ericsson and is really a very accomplished developer and DevOps engineer. He is our co-chair of our interoperability SIG at the CD Foundation, and he has started thinking about policies and how policies in some ways solve that interoperability or are part of that interoperability question when it comes to the continuous delivery pipeline. I reached out to him in a meeting and said, hey, maybe this is time that we bring this to a broader conversation. I consider him a thought leader in this area, even though he doesn't like to be called that, but he is. We know that there are open policy, there's open policy discussions around many aspects of DevOps, but this is specific to the continuous delivery pipeline. So I'm super happy to have Fatih here today, and I think that on that note, I will turn it over to Fatih. Just one other thing. We do have April 15th as our next meetup, and we'll have Chris Riley. He will be talking about pipeline analytics. I think he's starting to think about sort of door metrics and how those are changing. So join us in April for pipeline analytics. And don't forget, we have the CDCon in June. So if you haven't registered for CDCon, go to the CD Foundation website and do so. And Fatih, thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much, Tracy, for arranging this. As you summarized, this topic is pretty critical. And as you also mentioned, like we start talking about this topic within Continuous Delivery Foundation. And it's important to get more participation to the work we are doing in Continuous Delivery Foundation and in different special interest groups. And hopefully this discussion will help us find like-minded people from various industries so we can push for this together in a collaborative manner. So let me try sharing my screen. And now I hope you can see this. It is visible.
Yes, we are good. We can see it just fine.
Okay. So Tracy already introduced me, so I'm not going to repeat everything you said, Tracy, but as it is written on this slide as well, I am working as a developer in Ericsson Software Technology, and as you all know, Ericsson is a company active in telecommunications industry. And I'm also co-chairing CDF Special Interest Group together with Cara Delamark from CloudBees, and trying to highlight the challenges of end users, get conversations started between end users, projects, and vendors to address those challenges in a collaborative manner. And as I noted, policy is a topic we start working on recently. And even though this discussion will focus on continuous delivery aspects of policy, there are lots of things you can find online to see how far this topic could be taken. So today we will focus on continuous delivery and DevOps aspects. I will highlight few future-looking things as well, especially from telecom industry, because there is tremendous work happening within telecommunications industry, like other industries, and you can look for those to get yourselves into policy topic, which is pretty fun topic as well, not just critical, but also fun to deal with. So as usual, we all know the transformation, multitude of multiple technologies, different technologies, or multiple different industries are going through now. And I just took three of those industries as examples here: finance, medicine, and telecommunications. And as you can guess, and you probably are into one of these industries, all these new technologies and methodologies delivering tremendous advances in these different industries, like cloud native, virtualization, containers, these are new technologies. They are changing how the new features, new services to end users are developed and introduced. Apart from the technologies themselves, the methodologies are also critical to achieve the agility and speed to enable the innovation and finally give businesses more, share in the pie, if I must put that way. And for example, financial services, you all probably use certain banks. They are established banks, 100 years old. But if you look at the banking industry, financial services, you will see lots of new companies coming into the industry. You just install one app and everything just works. You don't have to go and deal with lots of things. You just get that app on your phone and you are good to go. And with medicine or healthcare, we are all going through this COVID situation, as you all know, and we all can see lots of case studies coming from healthcare medicine industry to highlight the importance of speed of development of new cures, for example, and especially the cure developed for COVID. If you read some blog posts shared by the people, you will see their approach taken from software development as well to analyze RNA and other type of stuff. And when it comes to telecom industry, as you well know, telecom industry is a pretty closed industry. It is not, how to say, easy for new entrants to come and bring in their business to this industry. But with all this openness happening last couple of years, telecom industry is opening as well. Like Linux Foundation hosts multiple networking projects, and Open RAN is another thing vendors and operators are talking about, and they all go back to agility and pace of innovation. And if you continue doing things in traditional way, you may lag behind the competition, because all these new breed of companies, startups, they are very fast, they innovate fast, they bring new services to the end users fast. So established versus startups, they're all in the same game, and they all need to adopt new technologies and support their development with these new methodologies. So everyone is moving towards this new age of doing things, and technology transformation is happening everywhere. And one of the prerequisites or enablers of this technology transformation is continuous delivery. Like, it is one of the key pieces in the various different methodologies we follow and apply to our software development lifecycle. And this is critical for all types of players, regardless of the industry, regardless of their size and history. You could very well be a 100-year-old company, but you have to go and challenge the startups, because they will be challenging you on a daily basis in order to keep the pace, in order to keep your business viable. You have to adapt to these new methodologies. And we are kind of in a, like, from continuous delivery perspective, we are kind of in a lucky domain, continuous delivery domain, because we have lots of new ideas coming out from communities or companies or individuals. And we can look at the different tools and technologies within the ecosystem supported by best practices. And you can try different technologies, and by reading case studies or failures of others, you can bring these methodologies and technologies to your own company. But at the same time, apart from being lucky by being in continuous delivery domain, it is also challenging, because the explosion in number of tools and technologies is like without their challenges. Like, if you want to establish a continuous delivery pipeline, for example, we have like 10, 15, 20 different technologies to achieve that. And similar to software configuration management, you can use various different tools and technologies to do your coding and code reviews and so on. And similar to artifact management, you have multiple different options to use within your organization. And obviously, as we mentioned at the beginning, we are working on addressing some of these challenges, and one of them is interoperability. because these tools and technologies are developed by various communities or companies, and it is important that we as users or developers or communities or vendors, companies, take a holistic approach. This ecosystem contains the ecosystem and try to address those challenges together. And interoperability is one of those challenges. And specific to policy has similar challenges to interoperability itself. Like for interoperability, for example, you need to have clear interfaces across different tools in order to ensure like they all adhere to those interfaces, they all use the interfaces, and they all adhere to certain standards. And if you look at the policy topic is suffering from the same issue, even though there are some efforts to streamline how policy is approached by different communities. There are still things to do within policy area to deal with interoperability aspects. But interoperability or technology aspects is not just the only problem with policy. There are other aspects which I am going to talk about coming minutes. And again, this topic, policy, should be worked on like any other topic we are working on within Context Delivery Foundation together, so we can highlight our needs, highlight our challenges, and get some collaboration going on within the ecosystem. So before starting to talk about policy itself, I want to walk you through a sample pipeline, and I am sure this pipeline will look pretty familiar to you because you all have more or less same type of pipeline. You may be using microservices, you may be using monolithic approach to develop your application, but regardless of type of the application you are developing, you have some kind of pipeline. And in this example, I take microservice as an example and walk you through this because microservices gives us better, how to say, ways to explain the challenges with policy. So on the left-hand side, we have multiple teams, and all those teams are developing specific microservices. As usual, their development is happening on some software configuration management system. Let's take GitHub as an example here. All those teams are developing their code, and they are sending that code contribution as a pull request to GitHub. And when that contribution ends up on GitHub, your pull request verification stage within your pipeline starts running. And depending on your workflow setup, these activities within pre-merge stage could be checking various things like static code analysis, like linting, or like YAML lint, or shell check, or Go static analysis. Apart from static code analysis, you may be doing unit tests, you may be trying to build your container image, and you may also be doing dependency scanning to see if the dependencies you are using within your microservice are actually in a low list. And depending on the outcome of these different activities within your pre-merge stage in your microservice pipeline, you may either block that pull request from getting merged to master branch, or you may say, yeah, this looks good, and if the code reviewers are happy with this pull request can be accepted. So this is, again, a typical pre-merge stage in a pipeline. And when your code got merged to the master branch, next step could be some kind of staging and testing in staging environment. And in that case, again, you may be doing builds, you may be doing more extensive testing than pre-merge stage, and you may be doing like smoke tests, performance tests, and security analysis. Again, all these things could result in a badge saying that, okay, it is great, this passed all those things. This could be pushed to registry as a released version, which can then go to production. And in this example, in production, we have rollouts in different regions like Americas and EU. And in production, we may be doing further test-like activities like canary deployment and A/B testing. And again, this is nothing magic. We all know this, but these are actually critical things we need critical things we need to take into account when we talk about policy. So if we take few of these things from different activities within our pipeline, on the left-hand side, we have more developer near activities such as quality checks, like unit tests. Developers are familiar with unit tests and they are comfortable with working with those unit tests, and they can go and manage those like things themselves without getting external help. And it's similar with block list, for example. The organization may have certain policy stating that the dependencies that are included within your microservice can't be older than 2 versions, 2 releases, for example, or you can't use the latest version. Again, developers should be comfortable to, configure those things within their pipelines and ensure they don't include old versions of dependencies, or they don't try to move to latest version without getting those versions vetted first. And in post-merge stage, again, developers are pretty familiar with the privileges, like are your processes running in sudo mode, for example, exposing your company to risks, or are you using default sports? Again, developers can ensure those policies are adhered to within their microservices. But when you go to the rightmost side of the pipeline, and when you come to rollout, things get a bit tricky, because essentially we developers are making critical business decisions with all the activities we are making during our development process. On the left-hand side, it's more focused on quality, perhaps, or security. On the right-hand side, it's focused on more business relevant activities. And all these things, yes, we should trust developers, and we know they will do their best to ensure whatever they push to, production via the pipeline will not put the company or business in risk. But it is also not fair to expect all the developers to know the business objectives of company or the domain or the industry the company is operating in. For example, if we talk about business, and if we look at the datetime and date example here, let's assume you are working for a company which is active in sales business. So you have an online portal which you sell electronics, and you are developing a new feature for your microservice, and you believe that that microservice is great. It doesn't have any problems. It passed all the previous checks, like in pre-merge stage or post-merge stage. It doesn't have any security issues. But you did this work just before Black Friday, and it may not be the best idea in the world to roll this change out to production on Thursday evening, because tomorrow is Black Friday, and you have to ensure that your site stays up and you can serve your users. So that is a consideration that is actually coming from business side of things. Obviously, developers know tomorrow is Black Friday, but at the same time, developers want to get their stuff into production as quickly as possible. And there is some conflict between like speed and the business side of things. And business takes precedence here usually, and new changes don't go into production just before Black Friday. And that is actually driven by the policy coming from business side of the organization. Another example is daytime. Perhaps the business has a policy saying that no one can push anything on Friday afternoon to production, because everyone is going to weekend and they will have time with their family and their friends, and they may not want to deal with issues that may occur during the weekend. So that could be another example policy blocking new versions of microservices to be rolled out to the production Friday afternoons. Again, this is like daytime. That is kind of, again, developers probably aware of these things. The other example is a bit more tricky, because regulations is like, it is very difficult to know all the different rules and regulations your company must adhere to depending on industry. For example, in healthcare, you have HIPAA. In telecom, you have GDPR, for example. The new service you are rolling out to the telecom network shouldn't, be putting your company risk from GDPR point of view. And in finance, you have other regulations. And as an example, a company might have a policy saying that, okay, we have this microservice with these features, but some of these features are not really adhering to GDPR. So this version must not be rolled out to European Union, because if we roll this version out, we may be, collecting data of users which we are not supposed to collect, and that policy could actually block rollout of that version, or that policy could actually turn off a feature flag saying that this feature is not activated within EU. And again, if we go back to the beginning of the pipeline, on the left-hand side, it is relatively easy for developers to get to know many things about quality checks or security checks. But if you go to the right, then it becomes more tricky, because you need to know different laws where your company is operating in, or different traditions. For example, in US, Black Friday is a big thing, but in Europe, there might be some other day that is important. So your company operating in Europe might have different policies when it comes to rolling out changes to production on a daily basis. I already mentioned a few considerations while walking through the pipeline. So few of these things are like functionality or features or new services. That is a consideration. You always want to bring new features or new services to end users, because you want to get the new business opportunities before the competition. But while you are doing the development of those new features or services, you must ensure that it has good quality, so it doesn't, crash all the time when users attempt to use or when users attempt to access your website. And while you are getting new features to end users and in a quality way, you may expose themselves to security risk, or you may expose the company to security risk. So we have to ensure that we don't break things when we are pushing things in a faster speed. And regulations is another thing I already talked about during the sample pipeline. And on the other hand, doing all these type of checks, like you have unit tests, you have smoke tests, you have quality checks, obviously you have security checks, you have regulations checks, but these things, these checks or these guardrails shouldn't slow down the pace of innovation as well. There needs to be a balance there. As a developer, you shouldn't really try to chase people to get information about if a certain feature you are implementing within your microservice adheres to certain regulations. There needs to be streamlined way to get such input from your legal part of your organization and get those things passed to you without wasting lots of time and slowing down the innovation. Similar to innovation, we must be fast, and continuously and DevOps helps you to be fast. So we have to ensure we keep this velocity going on all the times. And the other thing, developer experience, like developers, they like having fun. They like solving problems. They like, dealing with technical things. And sometimes some of these things like regulations or security type of issues, they may hurt developer experience. If I have to run after people to get answers to my questions with regards to rules and regulations, then I may, lose my ambition, because I am just on some idea, which is a great idea. I want that idea to be, realized and pushed to production. But if I need to deal with tons of people and spend days and weeks to get that idea giving permission, then that may actually hurt my experience as a developer. And finally, the businesses are there to make money. We have to ensure like these checks are there, viable, and they don't actually, endanger the business. Like if you keep the bar very low when it comes to enforcing your policies, then you may put the business in risk, and then that could cause losses for the business. Again, policies are business decisions, and they must be clearly defined, documented, and governed. Like, you can't just expect people to remember some conversation from some meeting and remember that thing when they are actually pushing something to production. They must be clearly defined, documented, and governed by the business. And some of those policies could be related to quality and security, and others could relate to rules and regulations. So it's very different types of policies the business could employ within their organizations. And another important aspect about policies is that they must be enforceable. Like, you can't just say, like, oh, it is important to ensure that we don't, expose default ports to internet. You have to ensure that those policies must be enforceable by your systems, automation systems. Apart from that, you must be able to measure how the organization is doing when they are developing software and pushing new features or services to end users. If the policies are violated continuously, then you may need to take a look at that policy and see why developers are violating that policy again and again. There might be something to be done there, so the policy could be perhaps a bit softened, or developers could be trained better why that policy is there and why it is as strict as it is now. Another thing is that we have to go and be able to audit those policies, because our companies, they are audited all the time depending on the industry, and those things go back to actually development organization. Development organization should be audited from this point of view. And why policies are in place or guardrails are in place? Obviously, one of the most basic things is that we want to prevent defects to slip to production, because those could result in costly outcomes and liabilities for the business. And again, these things may not be named policy in your organization, but I'm sure you all have certain types of checks to ensure that you catch defects as early as possible within your development process, and they get fixed much earlier within your process rather than catching them in the production. So that could be policies dealing with preventing defects. Another type of policy could be security-related policy to ensure the developers build security into application rather than implementing security like an afterthought, because it becomes very costly and risky to put security into your application after you actually develop your application. And developers must not make trade-offs that potentially endanger reliability and performance. And obviously, like software development or software architecture is all about trade-offs. But the organization must have clear policies to state when and what not to make trade-offs about. Certain things maybe, they may have lower bars, but certain things like security, we can't make any trade-offs for those things. And finally, the developers get benefits from policy-driven approach in traceability and auditability as well. And the other thing, when I was reading some articles, people generally talk about guidelines and policies. So they sound similar in some contexts, but if you think that in policy context, they are pretty different actually. The guidelines are suggested behavior. They talk about suggested behavior. For example, when you are walking on a road and you want to pass to the other side of the road, a guideline says look left, look right, look left again, and then you pass when there is no car. Obviously, this is a suggested behavior. You can skip looking your left and right, and you can just walk on the road and pass the other side, and you may be lucky. No car is coming, so you are safe. You continue with your life. But when it comes to policies, it's actually expected behavior. Like, you describe what the behavior of the system, your policies, you enforce your expected behavior using your policies. And that's why it is important that policies must be enforceable and measurable. Because if you can't enforce those behaviors in an expected way, then you are essentially having some guidelines. If you don't block a change going to production, for example, based on your policy, you are not actually stating an expected behavior. And another thing that I noticed when I was looking at this topic, people talk about policy in technology context. Again, developers like working with new technologies, developers like solving problems, but it is important that we all know that there is a clear distinction between policy and technology. For example, Open Policy Agent, that is a technology that helps you, bring policy-driven approach to your software development process. But when you actually talk about Open Policy Agent, while you were supposed to talk about policy itself, then you are mixing the actual policy with the technology. But in general terms, policies are actually business decisions. And once your business takes those decisions and comes up with clearly defined policies, then you look available technologies and pick and use a right technology to implement those policies within your organization. So this is a critical thing because, again, it goes back to continuous delivery actually, because people generally mix continuous integration with Jenkins. When people talk about continuous integration, they use Jenkins like as a replacement for it. But Jenkins is one of the many tools that you can implement continuous integration and continuous delivery within your organization. So this separation between actual concern and the technologies you actually can use to implement those things, they are two different things. Now, if we go back to our sample pipeline, and in our sample pipeline, we had developers that are dealing with all these type of different checks and guardrails and policies like quality checks, block lists, privileges, ports, date, time, date, and regulations types of policies. And when we think about the considerations we just have seen and notes about policy, the development of these policies are actually a business or organization-wide responsibility. Everyone should and must take part in developing, enforcing, auditing, and measuring these policies. Because on the left-hand side, developers are pretty competent in like functional type of things or security type of things. On the right-hand side, you may have salespeople who know what kind of implications the business or organization could have if you cause problems within your production during Black Friday, for example. And on the other hand, you have lawyers there coming from your legal department. They know the regulations and rules better than majority of developers. But they have a role to play here. So the development of policies and enforcing them are a collaborative thing within an organization. And if we employ something like policy framework, that could actually help the entire organization to contribute to development of policies and enforcement of them. And this actually kind of abstracts away actual implementation type of things from your software development to actually business level type of requirements. And if you abstract those things away from your actual technology or technical or development activities, then you essentially allow others within your organization to contribute to development of policies. Now, if we look at the things today, again, this is another example of sample pipeline, and I'm sure you all use one or more tools within your organization to establish pipelines. And a typical example for this could be like using Jenkins and Spinnaker, because Jenkins and Spinnaker are integrated with each other pretty well by the communities. So you can use Jenkins for your continuous integration type of things, and you can use Spinnaker for your continuous delivery and deployment type of activities. And there are multiple challenges with this type of setup. Okay, in Jenkins and Sprinklr case, the integration achieved by the communities may hide those challenges from you. But if you look at the continuous delivery ecosystem in a broader sense, you will see not all the technologies are, working well with each other in a good way, because in continuous delivery domain, there is clear lack of some harmonization and standardization, because there is no standards development organization within continuous delivery ecosystem, like how telecom industry has, like 3GPP, HC, and so on. And this lack of standards cause interoperability challenges within the ecosystem. And those interoperability challenges actually hurts policy work as well. Because again, based on the work we start within Special Interest Group Interoperability in Continuous Delivery Foundation, we start collecting approaches from different communities for the projects they are developing. And we got input from various communities like Jenkins, Sprinklr, Tekton, or Telius, and so on. And their take of policy differs between themselves. Yes, there are commonalities as well, but there are differences too. So if you think about this pipeline again, and if you assume you are using Jenkins as CI/CD technology X, and if you are using Tekton as CI/CD technology Y, and they have different take on policy, and you come to another level of interoperability challenge here, because if you want to have a streamlined way to handle your policies, then you have to deal with two different technologies, and you have to develop your policies specific to Jenkins side of things, and you have to develop your policies specific to Tekton side of things. And this actually becomes very unmanageable long term, because then you have two different ways of enforcing your policies. And integrating a policy framework like the one I've shown in previous slide becomes difficult as well, because there is no standard that policy framework could implement against. So those projects dealing with policy frameworks will have difficulties when it comes to bringing policy support to these different CI/CD technologies. And then that actually hits the users, because then those users may not be able to use the latest and greatest policy framework that is available within the domain or within the ecosystem. And if we go one level down, in some businesses, they employ external systems to enforce policies. And for example, if I must give an example from telecom industry, we have OSS, BSS systems like operation support systems or business support systems. And those systems actually take active part in taking decisions or making decisions in telecom networks. So if you want to do a canary rollout, for example, canary deployment within your production, and you want to roll out new version of microservice to see if it works well, and then that actually is driven by OSS systems and not by CI/CD technology. CI/CD technologies becomes the thing that actually rolls out new versions to the production, but actually that input is given by such external systems. And policy, parts of the policy logic is located within those systems. And because there is lack of standardization within domain and within policy area, it is very difficult for the actors within telecom industry to achieve desired interoperability between external systems and CI/CD technologies. And then again, it goes back to operators of those telecom networks, and when they want to enforce new policies within their networks, then they need to, somehow get new versions of certain telecom network functions to get those policies enforced, and that is unmanageable. And another example to external system could be Open Policy Agent. That is also an external system, and that could actually help the users of various CI/CD technologies to use Open Policy Agent or ONUP policy framework as a system to enforce policies. But again, there is no standardization in the place, in the domain. It is very difficult to achieve that. So you bring in Open Policy Agent to your organization, you integrate Open Policy Agent with Jenkins in one way, and then you integrate your Open Policy Agent with Tekton in another way. And then you have to keep maintaining that thing over and over. And your production system may, stop working suddenly because the community changed something, some interface changed, and your glue code or workaround doesn't work anymore. So challenges with policy. Again, try to highlight some of those challenges during these sample pipelines. But just to reiterate those things again, I think culture is one of the critical challenge within all of our organizations. Like we all know developers are creative, but it is not fair to expect them to grasp the business side of things fully. So we have to ensure the developers are trained, but at the same time, we have to ensure we provide paved roads for them to, become productive as fast as possible. And that can be done by putting standardized, policies in place in our pipeline. So the developers, when they develop a new feature and push it through your pipeline, those checks are enforced automatically without actually developers talking to, trying to find who to talk to, because there is a system there and that system can actually enforce those policies. And also, those policies could be documented like policy as code. And then developers can look at those policies within your repository and see what they actually do. And the other thing is like common shared understanding. Again, the objectives behind the policies, why they are there and why they're important is something we all need to learn more about. Otherwise, they become just okay, not okay type of decisions and like simple if conditions, which actually doesn't, grow ourselves as developers. The other issue with the understanding is like people generally mix policies versus rules. Like policies are, again, business objectives. Rules, you can see them as like technology choice because you can use rule engine to enforce policies, and they actually becomes your part of your technology stack rather than coming part of your business. And terminology, again, some people call these things policies, others call them conditions, and we need to establish a terminology here. So when we talk to each other, we actually mean the same thing when we use the same words. Best practice is something important because some organizations are pretty ahead of others when it comes to enforcing policies, and some industries are ahead of others because the type of industry they're active in. And those best practices must be shared with everyone within, the ecosystem. And without sharing best practice, we, can't help others to push towards the making things even better. And finally, focus. And if you put a query on your favorite search engine, like policy-driven development, policy-driven content segregation, policy-driven content deployment, most of or 90% of the hits you will get there, they all focus on security. Like everyone seems to be focused on security. Obviously, security is important, but security is not the only thing we can actually achieve by applying or standardizing policies. Regulations, rules, they're also important. And perhaps security, everyone can find lots of references about security, but there are not many references to rules or regulations types of policies. They need to be somehow brought into community's attention so the communities actually shift their focus to support businesses more. Yes, security is important, but there are other things to focus there as well, or include within the community focus. So on technology side of things, we have challenges with technology as well, like interoperability is one of them. I already summarized that, so I'm not going to talk about it more. The adaptability is something interesting because when we talk about the, standardizing policies and enforcing them in our pipelines, our focus is mostly on our software development process and early phases within the deployment or continuous deployment or rolling things out to production. But if you look at some industries, for example, telecommunications industry, the policy approach is actually extending to operations as well. Like if you think autonomous systems, you can't, roll out new versions of your services to those systems just to update a policy. So your policy should be adaptive, and it should be possible to update your policies without actually pushing new versions of your microservices. So rather than having your policies statically defined, having your policies defined in an adaptive manner so they can actually control the behavior of system that is in operation. And there are different approaches to achieve this. It is like in telecom industry, there are self-organizing networks, for example. Like you don't push new versions to your network, but actually your network actually takes certain decisions itself and tries to achieve desired state based on the policies enforced within the network. And you don't roll out new versions to achieve that state generally. And autonomous systems, they follow MAPE type of approach: monitor, analyze, plan, and execute approach. So the system continuously monitors, analyzes whatever it collected from the running system. It plans actions based on what it collected and based on the policies, and finally executes those by adhering to policies. So these are on the further right of the pipelines within the production. And actually that stage is not actually directly connected to pipeline because it's already operating and you are not pushing any new version of your microservice, but you are actually pushing updates to your policies. And that is critical to ensure that changing policies on the fly is possible. And another challenge is how the policies are developed and how their life cycle is managed. And this automation or adaptability or autonomous systems policies in such systems and their life cycle is like this one. But when it comes to developing policies, like should we take a declarative approach or imperative approach? This is something important to discuss. Apart from that, some of the policy projects have policy as code approach. Should we find a way to harmonize how we develop policies, or should we look at the ways we can bring development of policies to organization which could be different from each other? And the last challenge in this context is third-party systems. Like, what about my system that is running in production that is not actually a CI/CD technology, but it's actually driving what CI/CD technologies are doing? How I can integrate or how I can ensure my third-party systems can integrate with the CI/CD technologies. So I can push policies to my pipelines without actually putting workarounds in place just to be able to push them. So until now, we talked about challenges or the policy topic and challenges. What are we doing about these challenges? As Tracy mentioned at the beginning, we recently started discussions around policy topic within Continuous Delivery Foundation. And this conversation actually started in two places within Continuous Delivery Foundation. One of those places is Special Interest Group Interoperability, because of the reasons I summarized, like interoperability challenges between CI/CD technologies and policy frameworks or policy systems. And in parallel to that, CDF and User Council actually start talking about governance topics. So within CDF, this topic is actively discussed at the moment within these two groups, Special Interest Group and Interoperability and User Council. But as I also noted, like sharing best practices is important as well in policy area. And the other special interest group within CDF, special interest group best practices, is actually after collecting these best practices. So we have technology issues, which we can look at them as part of our interoperability work. We have best practices challenges. We can look at them as part of best practices work. We also have end users, which they can join and bring up their needs to broader discussion. And how those policies enforced or how those policies are transferred to systems, they can be done in different ways. Like you can use a REST API and push your policy to the system, or you can use events to pass your policies, and that could be worked under special interest group events. And why I am talking about these different groups within CDF is that CDF is a great community that actually gives people an open and neutral forum to discuss these things. And as you all know, it hosts many different CI/CD tools and technologies, and it hosts all these different groups. So you can go there, you can work with different communities, you can work with the people, like-minded people within different groups, and you can actually tackle with these challenges together. So if we can bring end users, developers into Continuous Delivery Foundation, we can get communication established between end users, CI/CD projects, and the police projects that are dealing with policy topic. And in this case, it is Open Policy Agent and ONUP, because these projects are not hosted by CD Foundation. It may be difficult for you to get a communication happening from your organization to Policy Agent project, for example, and Continuous Delivery Foundation could help with that as well, not just giving a place for you to talk about your challenges, but at the same time, find the right people to talk with from policy type of projects. And this is a screenshot of the document we are working on. And as you see here, we are collecting input from different projects like Communities and Technologies, Jenkins, Spinnaker, Tekton, Ortelius, Deploy Hub, Prozul, and Harness. And one thing to highlight here, even though we are working open source, it is important to collect input from enterprise versions of different CI/CD technologies. For example, in Spinnaker case, it is Armory, and Harness is also an enterprise offering. So we can compare and contrast the approaches of different organizations and find ways to streamline those things. In addition to communities, we are collecting input from users. Currently, we have input from eBay and Ericsson. And finally, we are collecting challenges from within user organizations or from projects. So what I want to summarize during last hour is that policy is critical for all organizations, regardless of the size. Like, you may be working within a startup, you may be working within an established organization. It doesn't matter how big your organization is or how old your organization is. You have to ensure you enforce your policies within your pipeline so you don't put the business in risk. Again, industry is not different. Obviously, all the industries, they are bound with different laws. They follow different rules and regulations, but there must be a common way to enforce those policies depending on the industry organization is operating in, and policy is critical for all these different industries. And type, like, are you operating in a highly regulated industry like healthcare, or you have a simple tool which helps users to do what they like, which is like not very highly regulated. You regulate your service yourself. And in order to establish such policies within organizations, we need to define standardized approach to defining and enforcing those things. And that is something I think we can push together. And in order for us to push those things, we need to address the challenges together. And that could only happen if we get broader participation from various communities, projects, and end users. And Continuous Delivery Foundation is like a great place to start a new conversation or take part in an ongoing conversation such as policy. And that is like this page. I think this page was updated more than 10 people. They all provide their input and they all make things visible to each other. So we are identifying some trends here, for example, and you can do that within Continuous Delivery Foundation. And that was all. So.
Thank you, Fatih. I just have, we're at the top of the hour,
Yeah.
But I do want to, if somebody out there would like to get involved in this conversation, that they're working on policies for their organization, they want to add to this, how can they reach you? How can they, what should be their next step if they want to get involved in this discussion?
Yes, so I put the links to the slides, and I hope you can still see the slides, or my screen at least. So on the last page of the presentation, let me start presenting it again. I put the links, these things. I put the links to all those things I talked about. Like, if you want to deal with the technological aspects of the policy, please join SIG Interoperability because our focus is mostly technology. If you want to work with best practices aspects of policy, join the SIG best practices. If you want to contribute a use case from your organization, you can directly go and update this document, which we are working on. So these are the links where you can find all the information, how to contribute, how to join.
So what we'll do is, if you can be sure and send this to me, and what I'll do is when I send the recording out, I will also send with it a link to this particular doc so that they'll have these links. Because as Fatih pointed out, this is a discussion that's broad and having more end users input and tools that are in the commercial area of the CI/CD pipeline. We need that information. And one last thing to ask you, I know we're 2 minutes in and this is a big question. What do you think is the next steps for the interoperability SIG in terms of, are we looking at potentially building a policy framework?
Actually, I wouldn't say we are looking to build a policy framework. I think what we can do is to reach out to different projects who are active in policy domain, like Open Policy Agent or ONAP Policy Framework, and bring those committees into discussions within CDF. So we can actually work with those committees to get such policy framework in place rather than ourselves developing it. In addition to that, like sharing best practices is another thing we can do both within interoperability SIG or best practice SIG. But I'm not sure if we should go and reinvent the wheel while there are other options out there. Right.
That makes sense. Well, I think what they say is watch this space. I think policies and events in CI/CD are both really going to be really important as we move forward and we try to accomplish the goal of the CDF, which is to help create a CI/CD pipeline that allows people to move through that with security and speed. And as you indicated, policies can potentially get in the way, but if we do it right, policies are simply the guardrails for the CD pipeline so that we can go faster.
Exactly.
Well, thank you. It's the top of the hour. Thank you so very much. I appreciate this, and this will be sent in a recording within the next 12 hours.
Okay. I will share the link with you. Thank you very much, Tracy.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.